there it goes. Okay, and we'll send this out to y'all at the end in an email. So in case you want to refer back to it for any reason, you can do that. Also, at the end of today, we're going to have lots of time for questions. So feel free to hang on to those at the end. Or if you want to ask your questions while we're going, you can do that too. Probably the best way to do that is just put them right into the chat. You can also DM anybody with an asterisk next to their name, and they would be happy to answer any of your questions that you might have. So with that, again, I want to say welcome. This is the second Tele-Townhall in our series. This is where we really share our programming, our updates, event details, and really also just give you a chance to connect with old TGP friends. It feels really good to get the group back together. It's also a good time to celebrate our successes. And today we're going to be talking specifically about why we want to expand into the great city of Philadelphia. We're going to talk about why we chose Philly, what we're doing to prepare for that transition. We're also talking about how you can get involved, how you can support our work. And also, if you have questions, which I'm sure you will, we're going to be happy to answer any of those. Ultimately, we are just so thankful that you're here today. You are crucial to the work that we're doing. And we really hope that you're going to take what you learned today and kind of act as spokespeople for us and spread this word to all of your networks, all your friends. And hopefully today will help you do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful T. Spence, our executive director and founder.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you everyone for joining today. I know we do have a pretty diverse group of people who are supporters, mentors, former athletes, gala attendees, all of the above. So I'm really grateful for people coming today. And as always, also, this is, as you know, this is our second Tele-Townhall. We're still really new to it. So always looking for feedback on, any requests for future Tele-Townhalls or interactions with this community. I guess I just want to start off by sharing, for those of you who I have not talked to about this, why would we expand to Philadelphia? And this is actually a question that is a real change from what we were thinking when we started the organization in 2009, but one that I'm really, really proud of and excited about. And it's the result of a lot of iterations of adding new programs in DC and looking at what's happening nationally and sort of back and forth to determine whether it made sense for us to try to go to provide programs outside of DC. For people who might have been, I'm looking at the list here to see who might have been around in 2009 when we started the Grassroots Project. It was originally Grassroots Hoyas at Georgetown. We were really focused on DC only, and we were focused on actually HIV prevention was the sole focus when we got started. And in the first couple of years, we grew pretty rapidly within DC, and there were a lot of people saying, this is something that could be done anywhere. This is an organization that has the potential to scale and expand. And it wasn't that we disagreed with that, but we were so committed to one city and to DC. And what we were hearing, what was resonating, with our athletes, with our board, with me back then, all of us, was less how could we replicate HIV prevention programs nationally, and it was more responding to people in DC saying, could you do the same thing for nutrition? Can you address mental health using college athletes in a games-based curriculum to talk about mental health? And so anybody who would have been on our last Tele-Townhall would have learned, over the years, we've really made our programs pretty wraparound, comprehensive, and kind of complex. So every student that is part of Grassroots is getting, now in 6th grade, actually, 10 weeks of nutrition, in 7th grade, sexual health, and in 8th grade, mental health. And one of the programs I get so excited about is a Grassroots FAM, which engages students, parents, and caregivers in health communication, health literacy, just sort of recognizing that they're already such a huge influencer, if not the most influential person in students' lives, and bringing our programs to meet them there. And then the final thing that we've added in the last couple of years, I believe in 2016, 17, as we started doing this, is Grassroots Connect, which brings our students together to meet actual care, clinical and social care providers to destigmatize the act of seeking mental health care or sexual health services through this really fun event. So we talked a lot in the last Tele-Townhall about how each of those programs was created and what it really looks like now. And during COVID, what we recognize is that we can talk for hours about any of these individual curricula or programs, but what we're really doing as an organization is less a combination of all these things, and we're centering all of our work in the idea of reimagining the way that a young person experiences health education. And we're doing it, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I think a really innovative way, getting athletes as role models into classrooms to reduce student to teacher ratio and having sensitive conversations with students. And then another thing we've heard a lot is how difficult it is for schools to provide the time and the schedules to teach health and to also have PE or physical activity. And so I think one of the really cool things about our program and our model is that we're in some ways sort of killing two birds with one stone by using a physical activity-based curriculum to teach health education, which also for the schools conveniently reduces the amount of time that's needed in the schedule to sort of achieve both of these goals. So during COVID, we started recognizing that this is really what we do as an organization. And we also started building relationships with other national stakeholders, active schools, the National Youth Sports Strategy. We worked at a high level with the State Superintendent of Education in DC, sort of helping them as thought partners think about how they can better respond to this larger need of health education and PE in the DC school system. And we recognize that there's an opportunity to replicate this model in other places. And this is a moment, perhaps more than ever, that calls for us to rethink health from a young age in schools and the culture of health that's created in schools. So that's a little bit of the background on what brings us into this idea of Philadelphia. I hope I didn't bore you with it. I think where I'll launch, Jane, who has led a lot of our work in choosing Philadelphia and our work with Trinaya and actually getting some things moving in Philadelphia already, is going to speak to that. But I also just want to say another big thing for us is, as we've made this decision, is recognizing how do we become an organization with eventually a national footprint and very soon a two-city footprint. How do we preserve the elements of community and the familial culture that many of you know exists at Grassroots as we add new cities and as we spend less time next to each other and we have, potentially staff and programs in multiple cities? And how do we also maintain the quality of our programs? So that's a conversation I'd love to have with, if we have time today, but certainly something that we want your input in as we continue to grow. So without further ado, I'll introduce Jane J. W. Wallace, TGP's Director of Programs and Operations, who's going to talk a little bit more about why we chose Philadelphia and what work's been done there to date.
Awesome. Thanks, T. Spence. Hey, everybody. So I'm going to, as Tyler said, focus a little bit more on the why and the how we're actually going to do this. These are questions that a lot of you that are on this call have been asking for the last year as we've been, starting to slowly tell people about this Philly expansion. So I want to get started in true TGP fashion with a question for the group. I don't need to talk this whole time. I'd love to know what you think. In choosing a city for Grassroots, imagine it was any city in the country to have this expansion of our national impact. What would be the criteria that you would think about in expanding an organization like Grassroots? So you can write it in the chat. You can speak if you want. All right, multiple universities near schools, demographics, not meeting PE health minutes and time. Oh, you guys were just like stealing the entire thunder of this presentation. Poorest large city, high need. Cool. You have another like 30 seconds. Cool athletes around. Yes. All right. So many of these answers are what we thought through. We ended up boiling down to 6 final criteria when we were looking at multiple different cities and trying to analyze what made sense for our first additional city. So we ended up with advancing health equity. So that is our core mission. So thinking about what the epidemiological profiles are within each city and understanding, where is there a need and where is there also a need that we feel like our programs could fill. Obviously, our student athletes are core to the type of programming that we use. So we need to be in a city that has access to Division I student athletes like we have here in DC. We have recognized that in the future, we could expand to other cities with a different volunteer base. But in order to replicate the first time, we want to use a model that has been tried and tested, which is our student athlete model here in DC. The next one is middle schools. So we want access to middle schools that have, in some ways, a similar structure to DC. So we'll get more into it, but Philly has a structure of public charter schools and public schools that mirrors the education system here in the district. It's also valuable that the student athletes are close to our middle schools. Something we recognize, like we don't send AU athletes all the way to Ward 7. We're really strategic about where our athletes are going in the city to maximize time, maximize efficiency, and make sure that athletes are having a really quality program. So we wanted to make sure that we picked a city that had student athletes that were found near the middle schools that we were targeting. Public health research, we've recognized that over the years, we've been able to continue to grow, have really high impact evaluation of our programs without a really large staff. And one of the reasons we're able to do that is because we have access to public health professionals at the various universities here in DC. And then lastly, proximity to HQ. For our first expansion, we want to think about how far was the distance going to be between DC and whatever city we chose, to make sure that there was kind of a seamless ability to get between the cities and really have this HQ model, but still have continuity between the two sites. So to dive in a little bit to this, obviously we're starting with the opportunity to advance health equity. So Philadelphia has similar disparities in health outcomes and equities and health resources to what we see in DC. And there are significant associations between health outcomes and race and poverty in Philly, as is most cities. So this was definitely one of those criteria where, you know, if you're doing an assessment of multiple different cities, most East Coast cities fit this bill. But we'll take a deeper look quickly at some of the health statistics that we've focused in on. So you can see the top statistics are around sexual health on both the left and the right. So we have an HIV incidence of 28.8 per 100,000, which is significantly higher than the nationwide average. So Philly is still considered one of the target areas for federal and local funding around HIV/AIDS. But then if you're looking also at other STIs and other sexual health issues, the rates of both gonorrhea and chlamydia are significantly higher than the national averages in Philadelphia. And this mirrors very similarly to the rates that we see in DC. I think the other thing to always think through is, you know, who is the population? So we're seeing those rates there are gonorrhea and chlamydia around teens. But we also see new cases of HIV among adolescents are high in Philadelphia. Again, that's similar to DC, where in 2019, 20% of new cases of HIV were among those that were the population under 24. So just recognizing that we're looking both at an epidemiological report of the entire city, but also specifically youth in these cities. Then if you look below the sexual health statistics on the left, we're seeing that just over 1 in 5 children aged 5 to 18 are considered obese within Philadelphia. That is actually increasing, and there is like kind of some preliminary 2021 data out that a lot of, you know, public health professionals are thinking through the correlation to the COVID-19 pandemic and students being home and obesity rates rising. We also see on the right side some mental health statistics. 40.3% of teens citywide experiencing depressive symptoms. Again, these are rates that are rising year to year, and we're seeing a pretty significant rise in the most recent data that isn't formally published yet, but there are some reports out. There's a couple of additional statistics on here that we have been thinking through and putting together as we think about our flagship nutrition, sexual health, and mental health programs and how we would incorporate additional health issues that we know are affecting Philadelphia. So you'll see both opioid prescription overdose rates, which again, we have seen increases from 2019 to current 2021 data, as well as homicide rates. And we know that there is a lot of youth violence in Philadelphia as well. I'm seeing the chat blow up. Oh, it's Lara, love it. Okay. So that's kind of the epidemiological, the health, public health side of things. The other core component is student athletes. So when we think about the universities and we looked at a lot of cities, you know, people have said to us like, why not Baltimore? Why not New York? One of the major reasons is the athletic departments. So we know that we have 6 Division I universities. I apologize, Drexel's little picture didn't make it in here, but it's there. So there are 6 main universities that all are within the Philly region. Our first target will be St. Joe's, Temple, LaSalle, UPenn, and Drexel, as those 5 are located within the city. And we've started to slowly narrow that down in recent weeks to Temple, LaSalle, Drexel, and possibly UPenn as well. But the idea is that these are proximal to middle schools that we would want to work with. They also have big athletic departments that have a commitment to service and staff members that are working with athletes on things like life skills and development. The next one is a network of public charter schools. So as many of you know, I know some of us that have been involved in Grassroots for a long time may not know totally about the shift that we've really put towards public charter schools. But in most cities throughout the country, we're seeing a larger influx of public charter schools. So these are publicly funded, but don't follow the same curriculum requirements and a variety of other things that public schools require. With that, we know that a lot of our charter schools don't have as much access to health and physical education, particularly for staff. So for example, many K-8 schools will have one educator for health and PE for all 9 grades, K-8. So we recognize there's a big need there. And Philadelphia is very similar to DC in that more than half of their middle school population is at public charter schools as opposed to neighborhood public schools. It's not to say we wouldn't work in public schools in Philly, but we are starting with public charter, and we also have multiple connections from our DC networks to those Philly networks. The next one is obviously the proximity of universities to middle schools. In many ways, the Philly universities are actually closer to some of the schools than in DC. So we actually see this as an advantage to the current way we are operating programs here. As many of you know, one of the things that we know is a barrier for athletes to really provide solid health education and work with the highest need schools is transportation. So there are a lot of volunteer opportunities to middle schools that are right near our college campuses. It's a lot harder to go to parts of the city that don't have a fancy Division I university next door. So we eliminate that barrier by providing transportation for all of our students by reimbursing their Uber and Lyfts to get to these schools. So we want to make sure that that's still feasible for us and also doesn't take 2 hours to get to a school. So it's important to recognize that a lot of the schools within Philadelphia are actually within miles, just a couple miles of several of the middle schools that are on our target list. So next criteria is the public health research and infrastructure. I think many of you understand this one. Philly is home to some of the top research institutions in fields of health promotion and disease prevention. We've already received some contacts. This is definitely an area where those of our alumni that are from the Philadelphia area, we're going to be reaching out to see who you know and who we can get in contact with, because building up that network of academic stakeholders is going to be really important for us as well. And then the last one is proximity to Washington, D.C. So we kind of went back and forth on this and the value of this and why it is one of the 6 criteria that we're looking at, because we recognize that we want to be in cities where there is a high need. We want our student athletes to be successful, but we also recognize that expanding has the potential to, have consequences on our flagship DC programming. And that's something that we have been really strategic in writing all of our plans and all of our costing models to make sure that we do not lose any of our progress and our growth within DC, that we are continuing to make programs higher quality and reach more students here, have a bigger impact on student athletes' lives here in DC, and not let any of our expansion plans get in the way of the programming that we're doing here in DC. So something that's really central to that is being able to go in between the 2 cities pretty quickly. Philly is obviously only a couple hours away, and it allows our staff to play a heavy hand in making sure that fidelity in the early programs in Philadelphia with new staff in Philadelphia is seamless, while also maintaining the integrity of the programs here in DC. Okay, so that's all the why. Those are the 6 boiled down. Obviously, that was a lot of work. We worked with several different consultants on that project and really thought through why Philadelphia was so important. And now I think this is like the next big question that a lot of people have asked, and it is the how. So obviously we had our strategic planning leading up to this January to March 22. So I'm going to leave that out of it because that's in the past. We've already done it. So starting this year, it's really been starting the implementation of this expansion. So from January to March, we did a full stakeholder analysis, identified our schools and prioritized universities. So we started with a list of about 85 middle schools in Philadelphia, and we boiled that down to the highest priority schools. And now we're in the process of meeting with each of those schools. So thus far, as we move to this April, June time, we've met with 2 of our middle schools and have a few more meetings set up. One who's already agreed to be a pilot school for us, and another that also has connections to a lot of other charter schools. So in this stakeholder analysis and introduction to school phase, it's really about building relationships, figuring out what schools need, not assuming that every school wants Grassroots, not assuming that every school has the need that Grassroots is trying to fill, but really getting an understanding of what is the landscape in these Philly schools and how can our programs benefit them, but also how can we adapt our programs to make sure that we are putting the community and the needs of the schools first. And honestly, this is a really fun phase because it's getting to know new people that haven't seen a program like this. You know, in DC, everyone knows who we are. We don't go into schools and people are like, who are you? So it's been a really fun process. And I think it's something that we continue to look forward to in the summer months. The other step is getting to know universities and figuring out how we can put our best foot forward in terms of equity around figuring out which teams we want to work with. We recognize that in DC, our biggest school, and we have the most volunteers from an HBCU. So Howard is our biggest contributor to our programs. We don't have an HBCU that has Division I athletics in Philadelphia. And we recognize that that's been a huge driving factor to make sure that our volunteer base is diverse and looks like the students that we are serving. And that's core to our mission. So we're also making sure that we are looking at teams, communicating with athletic departments to make certain that we are considering equity in multiple different forms. One of the weaknesses we've had in DC is that we have a big female athlete volunteer pool. So about 80% of our athletes in the last couple of years have been female. We want to make sure that we're trying to even out that ratio as we start in a new city. So there's multiple different factors that we're looking at. And when we're having conversations with universities, we have this new potential, like starting fresh and saying like, this is what we want. This is what we require. We want to meet with, these specific teams and these specific coaches. So next step there will be from July to September, we're going to mobilize our volunteers in schools. That doesn't mean starting program. It means starting our pilots, getting athletes interested, recruiting, getting our school schedule set so that come January through March, we will have our inaugural Philly programs. So that'll be next January. What I skipped over here is just a little pilot program curriculum updates. We do plan to do a few weeks in Philadelphia at some select schools where we will test out our curriculum and make any adaptations that we need to make in order to make sure that our programs are very Philly specific. And then the last thing will be building infrastructure. So this time next year, next spring, we plan to be building out our Philly staff and making sure that we're ready for our true 3-year partnerships with each of our schools to begin for that following 2023-24 academic year. So with anyhow, you also have to think about what is the costing model. Some of this has changed slightly with COVID adaptations, but I think it follows a model that has worked thus far. And we're seeing that we are emphasizing 3 components of the strategic plan. So yes, today we're telling you all about Philly, but I think it's important to recognize what it is that we're doing to build up DC, to make DC more sustainable, to increase our organizational impact so that we can have a larger national growth, but then also replicate our programs in Philly. So it's not enough to just show you what our Philly budget would be, but you can see that over the years, we'll be taking a bigger and bigger risk within Philadelphia. But to get started, we're relying a lot on our DC team because we don't want to take that risk until we've seen that these programs really work, until we've seen that Philadelphia citizens really want this type of programming. So this is a costing model that is obviously a continuous work in progress as we continue to be more efficient with our spending, but also important to recognize that we have some pretty ambitious revenue goals, and we will be trying to fundraise in a new way in a new city, which has new challenges and also some exciting things to come. So with that being said, I'm going to throw it back to Tyler. Do I have
Yes,
questions?
so, thank you, Jane, for taking us through the entire sort of where we started and where we are with Philly. We still have a lot more work left to do in Philly. And the first thing I want to do before we get into Q&A is just ask everyone explicitly who's on this call, if you know anybody in Philly that we should talk to, or even nationally. At the beginning, I talked about how you know, our long-term plan for this organization is that we would be a national leader in reframing health education and PE in schools. Right now, we're really focused on replicating in Philly. But the most valuable question we've ever asked in this organization is asking people who know us. Who else should we know? So if you know anyone, I want to ask you to send me and Katie an email, even if it's just like one word or a name or someone who you think would be valuable for us to talk to. We'd love it if you introduced us to them, if you wanted to be part of that first meeting with them, but even if it's just a name for us to explore, it would be super helpful for us. The second thing I want to speak to a little bit to fundraising is we've had a lot of success in the last couple of years in growing our fundraising and getting ready for this expansion. 3 years ago, we think our revenue was 300,000. 2 years it was 600,000, and last year we raised over 1.2 million in a year, which is really, really exciting for our team. And it just shows that people believe in us to make this expansion possible. And a lot of people actually in this room, if not maybe everyone, is a donor to the Grassroots Project. One of the things we're hoping to do in Philly is increase our membership in our Coaches Circle, which is a monthly recurring giving program, which is more than doubled in size in the last year since we launched it. But what we're hoping is we can get more of our existing athletes, alumni. I think we have 4 people in this call who are already members of the Coaches Circle. So thank you for that. But I wanted to do a little quick, we're going to put a link in the chat to the Coaches Circle to join the Coaches Circle. But I also want to do a little interview with Lucia Rose, AKA Roser, if we can get to the next slide. So Lucia was an athlete in Grassroots, and much more than that, she helped design some of these curricula. She's done so much for the organization. Lucia, tell us why you chose to join the Coaches Circle after graduation.
Yeah, I think it's 2-part. One, I know how important the work that Grassroots does is for the actual schools in the community. And so, of course, I want to do what I can to help with that. But also as an athlete, I got so much from being in Grassroots. Every interview I've ever been on, I've talked about tools that I've gotten or skills that I've learned, and the ways it's helped me become a better student and athlete in person. And so I feel like, you know, it's, even if it's just a little bit every month, giving back to that for something that gave so much to me is really important.
What was your favorite memory, like story or memory from Grassroots in schools? Or it could be the office.
Ooh, well, I got, probably it's all the ping pong in the office, of course. But I think in schools, it was always around the post surveys and getting to see how much kids had learned. And then, of course, I think especially with JW and Mac, you know, trying out all the new curriculum and trying to see what games worked and what didn't work. That was always really fun to see, like games that totally fell apart and what we could learn from them, or games that were really big successes on the first try.
Cool. Why did you, I'm interested to know this really, why would you give monthly instead of just giving once a year or one time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an easy way to do it. It's something I don't have to think about. And I get that receipt in my email and I know it's done and I don't have to set a reminder or anything. So a lot of it, I think it's just efficiency. But it also makes sure that I don't, you know, forget to give or try to wonder when I gave last or anything like that.
Cool. Do you have any advice for anyone thinking of giving to TGP or joining TGP in some fashion?
In terms of giving Coaches Circle or joining TGP generally?
Either or both.
Okay. I think in terms of Coaches Circle, I mean, I give a small amount what I can right now in law school. So you don't have to be a big donor to, you know, make sure you're making, you know, some contribution as you can. So I think if you're thinking about it and you don't know how much you can give, even just a little bit, I'm sure helps you guys. And then I think TGP generally, it's honestly the best memory and experience of mine from college as an athlete. And so I would, you know, give long speeches about why athletes should join Grassroots.
Thank you so much, Lucia. Thank you for giving back. And so many people, and again, in this room are also part of the Coaches Circle, which is awesome. And it's anything from $1 a month to over $100 a month. That's our current membership in the Coaches Circle. And it's something that we really hope to develop more. As Jane, I think, put in the chat, for next year for Philadelphia, our big goal is to raise 250,000. I think it's 256,000 for Philadelphia. And I'll update you all. Many of you who know me know that I write a lot of grants. And we have been working on relationships in Philadelphia. I think our biggest prospect right now is with the Pew Charitable Trust, who is excited to consider us for a grant, but what they are waiting for is for us to have a little bit of a pilot happening in Philly. So I think Jane had mentioned something that's always happened with Grassroots is whenever we have something new, it's really hard to get funded, and we often have to ask for individual donors to help make that happen, to help get it started. And then once the momentum is created, and once we sort of have some pilot data and stories and pictures, and people know that, you know, Grassroots is actually in Philadelphia, usually the larger funders will come in and support sustaining that work. Grassroots is very largely funded from what they call institutional funders, foundations and corporations, which is amazing. But we recognize that there are also lots of individual people who you all don't have to be convinced what Grassroots is. Many of you are part of it. You've known it for a long time. So we're really trying to do a better job, and really happy to hear candid feedback from you all on how we can get more people excited to give and how we can make that a stronger relationship. So that's what we want to do through the Coaches Circle I almost stole someone else's thunder about one more announcement coming up after this. But yes, please consider making a donation through the TGP Coaches Circle. And thank you, Lucia. I'm going to send it back to Katie, who's on mute, I think.
Okay. No. Okay. Well, and like Tyler said, like, y'all are so crucial to the work that we're trying to do here in DC, but also in Philadelphia. And we want to make sure that if you're giving, if you're, trying to stay a part of TGP, that we are doing our part to make sure that you're staying informed. And so we do want to make sure that these Tele-Townhalls continue to be an ongoing series. And so we are planning to have one in June 2022. So just be on the lookout for that. I'm assuming most people in this Tele-Townhall are part of our newsletters, but if not, make sure you sign up for those. And again, like, you are our spokespeople. So if you can go out and, even if it's just to like 5 of your friends and say, hey, I was part of this really cool organization, I want you to know about it. Why don't you join the next Tele-Townhall so you can learn? That would be so incredible, just to get more of our story out there. Other big announcement, which I think is the one that Tyler was excited to tell you about, is our gala. We have officially chosen a date and a location. It's going to be October 1st in the showroom in downtown DC. There's going to be cocktails, we're going to have dinner, celebrating. We're really trying to do a lot in the planning process right now, just to make sure that it's super interactive. It really captures the feel and the just the personality of TGP. So we hope that you can make it. Bring all your friends, bring your family. Yeah, and it's going to be a good time. So if you have any questions about the gala, you can reach out to Jane. You can reach out to myself. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions. All right. And with that, we are going to go into any kind of Q&As that you might have. Any questions? We are happy to answer those. Yay, 2022 TGP Gala. Yes, Spencer Kelly. Fallon's got the calendar hold. Awesome.
I have a question. Can I just like ask it through here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I may be like a bit ahead of the game, but because I know we are talking about like Philly and expanding and stuff. So I guess like with Philly like starting in 2023 from the calendar, is there like a time frame, do you think, like before you decide like if there's going to be another city that you expand to, or like if maybe you only keep it between like DC and Philly? Like, do you know, or do you kind of like are just going to base it off of like how well Philly does, like whether that takes like a year or two or whatever to figure out?
That's a great question, Marley. I know, and I can let Tyler jump in here as well. But so essentially this strategic plan that we have written now takes us through 2025, but part of the process won't be waiting until then to get the next strategic plan started. So as we analyze our results in Philly after our first year and into year 2, we'll be able to start making this, decision of, okay, is expanding to multiple cities something that is both feasible and high impact? Or do we need to go back to the drawing board to figure out what our next strategic goal will be? But hopefully, I think what we all recognize is what we think is the need and what we propose or hypothesize will happen is that we start to see impact in Philly. We continue to make those programs stronger, and we start to build out a plan for what our next strategic goals would be, what next cities we would try to expand to.
Yeah, and I just to add on to that, we considered, it feels like a long time ago now when we first started this process, we considered a lot of different replication models, and there's like the franchising model where we would just train another organization in Philadelphia to implement our programs, or the model we chose was we really want to play a part in the whole community organizing effort as opposed to sort of selling a training to other organizations to implement. We also thought, well, if we have this big national vision, why not just make a huge fundraising push and try to launch Grassroots in 10 cities, if that's what we really want, where we want to be in the end. The idea behind Philly, and yeah, I mean, Jane's answer is absolutely correct. We have a strategic plan 2022 to 2025, and it's really focused on Philly. And the reason is we think we've planned things out so well, but we recognize and have learned from other organizations that even the best laid plans, how does the phrase go? We're going to learn something. We're going to mess something up probably. I hope we don't. But the idea is to like really understand what is the best infrastructure? What is the best staffing structure? How does DC talk to Philadelphia? What does it look like? Will we have a national board of directors that governs both of these places, or what will the autonomy of the two cities be? And kind of the concept I introduced before that's so important to our entire team and our board is we really want to have real roots in a community, and we want the organization to be reflective of the needs of that community. And we're just, I mean, we have Trinaya, who grew up in Philly, on this call and on our staff. And we trust ourselves to develop those relationships, but it's just, there will be things that emerge as we embark on this Philly expansion in the next couple of years. So we haven't yet charted what's next, but I'll say, without it being in writing, I'll say that our idea of expansion is to figure it out in 2 cities and then to go from there to a much larger expansion. We're not planning to go to Philadelphia and then spend 3 more years going to New York and then 3 more years. We really want to build a case for support, have an expansion model we feel confident about, and then from there sort of make a larger leap into this national level impact. And it's all very ambitious, but many of you have been along the path for a long time and seen us do really ambitious stuff in DC. So I'm confident we're going to be able to make it happen.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Markia.
Florida's a great state. It's nice and sunny, so feel free to.
I love the personal please. Every time, I feel like every alum I talk to, they're like, oh, Houston would be great. Florida's awesome. Atlanta, like, so I hear you, Markia. I would like a warm state as well.
I see Diana's hand raised. Dr. Sameville Robinson.
Hello, everybody. Hey, Tyler, it's so great to see you again. I'm super excited to be on this call. For those who don't know me, my name is Diana Sameville Robinson. I'm a proud Georgetown University graduate in 2014, and I also was a grassroots coach when I was undergrad at Georgetown, and I'm super excited you guys are expanding to Philadelphia. I'm also an alum of Temple and UPenn, so I'm like super connected, and I'm so excited to like share some other contact information for you guys to connect with as well. I know that you guys discussed in terms of now being expanded in Philadelphia. One of the biggest things that we guys are trying to figure out and map out is like, how can we get a more of an outreach of like the African-American community as well? Because one of the biggest supporters you guys had was Howard, and now expanding to different cities like Philadelphia, there will be less and less HBCUs present in certain cities. Have you guys considered in terms of reaching out to Black Greek organizations in these schools? Because one thing to keep in mind when you are expanding to different cities, like every single PWI university will have some form of like Greek organization that are extremely helpful in terms of getting individuals that look like our students that we're going to serve to get involved. And some of their also members are also student athletes as well, because I know that is a sports-based program. But just keeping that in mind in terms of whether or not you guys are open to reach out to the D9 organizations at the universities athletes at Temple to see whether or not they can also help support you guys with getting more recruits and coaches in the schools.
I think that is an incredible idea. I'm going to throw it to Trinaya to talk a little bit more about this. But one thing we have been looking through is essentially like what is our SWOT analysis of general students on individual campuses? We know the student athlete population works really well, but expanding to one additional group could be something that's within our future. We also have a lot of connections from our DC universities and participation of our athletes in the Greek life that we could tap into those networks. So I think it's a great idea that I would love to add to the work that we're already doing. Trinaya, do you want to add in there some of the thought processes you've had and the work you've done in the last few weeks on this?
Yeah, just kind of like I took some time to just like go through, all of the athletic teams that were at like all the universities, where like number by number, and was trying to see like, okay, can we really get a diverse population of student athletes that represent our students? And the truth is that number is a little wary because, like those universities are PWI. So, I mentioned this like first off when I started working with them, like Philly is a very different city. So we're definitely going to need a lot of Black and brown people of color that will not only represent the city, but also will reflect the students that are in that city and Philly as well, knowing that I'm here right now. So we even thought about, working with charter networks where potentially, like maybe we may have high school students, actually be able to teach those students, but, that opens up a can of worms. So, and this is also a learning process for me with just like development. So taking the time to like know all of the small steps that go into, piloting programs. So Dr. Sanville, I'm right up your alley. I'm thinking about it. And I definitely want to make sure that when we replicate TGP in Philly, it's the right way, for sure. So those are my 2 cents.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I should have definitely did that in my intro. Trinaya was one of my former students in Philadelphia. I worked at Mastery. I'm like all over the place here. Like started with Grassroots DC and went to school in Philadelphia. And like one of my former student works at Grassroots Project, Tyler. I'm like super ecstatic right now. But yes, well connected. I'm happy to help wherever I can.
Thank you. That is such a small world.
Dr. Sanville was the best. I'm gonna just say that.
You already know. You already know. Thank you. Trinaya, you're amazing as well. So I'm so glad to see you on this call, and I'm super excited to be back with Grassroots again.
I'm gonna throw a little. Can you see the archive pic I found here, Dr.
Really,
Sanville?
Tyler? Seriously? We'll talk about this offline.
Yeah, agreed.
Does anyone else have thoughts, questions, connections? This is super helpful, these first couple.
I just shot an email and CC'd Katie and Tyler to the director of fieldwork and the associate director of the program at Penn's MPH program. They have like a capstone and fieldwork requirement. So I think probably both of those would work well for like, I'm sure though there would be an MPH student who'd be happy to do like a program evaluation of your first several semesters. So I just connected you all. Hopefully that'll be fruitful.
CJ, you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Hi, I'm Christina. Grassroots named DJ CJ. A lot of people still call me that. I graduated from Georgetown in 2017. I was on the rowing team. I also like interned / did some other work things at Grassroots. I don't even know what I did, but now I've been at Penn for 5 years, and I'm in the Master of Public Health program. So yeah, got some Penn research connections.
That's awesome. And that's exactly how we use MPH students from GW currently, just to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the evaluation of our programs. So that's exactly a connection we're looking for. It's awesome.
Yeah, the 2 people I connected you with are both really awesome. One of them is my like advisor, so you're in good hands.
I love it. Shout out to Fallon for joining. Coaches Circle, newest member. Is she still here? Yeah, she's there.
And her fiance joined last night. So between the two of them.
Amazing. Who else? Does anyone else have anything to say in this group? Questions to ask? I kind of like it that it's a small group.
I agree. The first one, it was way too many people. I know that's like not something you should complain about, but it was hard to like see everybody's faces the first time.
Do we have any other announcements? We're all really amped for the gala, as you all know. We had a gala, our first gala 2018, and then it was very small. We didn't think that we could do a gala, and this other organization encouraged us to do it, and we pulled it off. And then the next year, I think 2018, we sold out our gala, which is a bit larger. And then, as many of you know, we had a gala planned for March 28th, 2020, that we had to obviously cancel because of COVID. So we hope that we have all plans of keeping this one moving forward. It looks like events are happening again in person, but we also, with this sort of engagement and our coaches circle, and we've got a lot of alumni work going on, it's just going to be awesome to see people in person and celebrate. And we've chosen a venue. You'll get to save the date, but we're super pumped to have the gala.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I know that quality is a big part of TGP, having good fidelity. And I think you mentioned at the beginning of the, first of all, my name is Suizan. Yeah, I was a coach at TGP for 2.5 years and intern at TGP as well. And I'm really excited about this expansion. It's really interesting to hear the story and hear how things are progressing. And I know that fidelity and quality are like big components of TGP's programs. And I've always been curious about seeing TGP expand sooner. Actually, I know that there's just the culture of TGP. It really is people, it has a strong culture and has good quality programs. And I'm interested in hearing what's spurred you to expand now rather than, for example, 2 to 3 years ago. And then you also mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that like quality is an important part for you and how you really want to make sure you maintain that. And so was there like a specific like full circle moment for where you answered that? I know we talked about the criteria, but I was wondering if there's anything else involved with that.
I can tackle the first question of kind of like why now in terms of quality, if I'm hearing you right, Suiz?
Yeah, sorry, it's kind of loaded. I have a hard time putting the question together.
No, I love it. And I know you well enough to know your thought process here, and I love it. I miss that thought partnership in the office. But I think, you know, one of the things we really wanted to accomplish with our previous strategic plan, which was building out from an HIV organization to a comprehensive sexual health or comprehensive health education organization, was not only building these curricula using our community-focused model, but is also evaluating that curriculum. So we've spent the last 3 years, you know, increasing our capacity to evaluate programs and really understand the impact that we're having on youth, both quantitatively and qualitatively. So I think what we didn't want to do was expand too quickly before we had really evaluated our curriculum, made changes to our curriculum, allowed the first pilot season to like sit in and then make that additional recommendation. So for example, with all 3 of our curriculum, we made massive changes last year to even what like Markia or Suiz or Roser had seen before you guys graduated just a couple years ago. So with that being said, I think, you know, part of keeping our high quality, part of having fidelity, part of making sure that this expansion is a high quality expansion that is meeting the needs of students in Philadelphia is making sure that our programs are as strong as possible in DC. So we have been really specific about like, okay, how do we build everything infrastructurally? And that's not just program quality, but that's also operations. That's making sure that, you know, the ease of building relationships with middle schools and making sure that every single practice is happening. As many of you know, like 5 years ago, sometimes a program was great and had all 10 sessions and sometimes 4 sessions went off. And now we have a pretty strong fidelity where every student really is getting the full curriculum. And we want to make sure that we're able to replicate that level of quality. So I think that's been the kind of like why wait and why now, because in a lot of ways we have built that infrastructure. I think there's still things we can do to get stronger and get better. But COVID was a little bit of a blessing for us. I think it forced us to slow down, build infrastructure even more, and really be thoughtful about how we are implementing programs to the highest ability, and also like what it takes to do that. What is the funding that's needed for that? What is the staffing model? What does a program team need to look like in Philadelphia to be as sustainable as possible? But also recognizing like we're TGP, we're not going to have 1 million staff members. We don't want that kind of overhead. We want people that can grow in roles and really feel good about the work that they're doing and really put ownership on student athletes so that they can have a major impact. But to be able to do that, it takes like time and thought and figuring out what works in DC, what doesn't work in DC, and then how that could correlate to our programming in Philly. So that's my long answer. Is that touching on what you were getting at, Suisse?
Yeah, it wasn't a very good question, but I was just wondering a little bit further about what really cues Grassroots to be ready to expand. Now, I've always been interested in seeing them expand further, and I'm wondering like what sparked it right now. I know I went over so many things and covered many things in the presentation, but I was wondering if there's one thing. But yeah, that was helpful. Thanks.
And I think go for it, Tyler.
I'll just add on to that to shout out Jane and Mac and Shania and Lara on the program team, and actually a lot of people who are on this call as well, for getting us to the point where many of you who have been in our classrooms have had moments where you're like, wow, Grassroots has made the biggest impact on the student's life. And many of you have also been in classrooms where you're like, oh my gosh, what happened there, And I think like those moments are happening less and less, and it's not an easy accomplishment to get to this point where our partnerships are so solid, we're so valued in our schools. We have like a robust team of people who have different skills who are also focused on programs. So I think like, just to echo that, I think that would have been my worry about quality years ago, is even though we've always been on this trajectory, now we're in a place that is just so different. It's just sort of levels above where it used to be. I mean, the other thing from my perspective is like during COVID, we had a donor who gave us money to do strategic planning only, like specifically. And we did recognize our current strategic plan we had like finished it. So it was like, well, we do need to do a strategic plan. And I had written our last strategic plan, which, as much as I think I'm great at it, it's just, this was a process that really engaged staff, our board, external consultants into like really hashing out a much more robust and thoughtful strategic plan. And then the last thing I'll say is COVID, just as many of you have seen, COVID has put public health front and center. For me personally, one of my reflections on COVID is it feels so frustrating that it's clear, not that it didn't exist before, but it's more clear than ever that we don't have a culture of collect responsibility for each other's health. It all seems so individualistic. And I think what Grassroots does is, as many of you all have seen in a classroom, changes, not just educate students about their health, but also changes the conversation and changes norms about how we need to support each other to achieving some pretty difficult and complicated health outcomes at the community level. And I think one of the things that I'm so proud of seeing the curriculum develop over time is that the curriculum recognizes that. And so, yeah, I'm just sort of at a really pie in the sky, big picture level. I think COVID has shown an opportunity that Grassroots has uniquely sort of risen to the occasion to provide, which is really, for lack of better words, reimagining health education. So yeah, it's not one thing. It's a whole bunch of factors and a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of mistakes along the way. But I hope that also helps answer the question.
And I think the last part is it's a risk. It's a financial risk to move to a new city and pay new staff and take all of this. And I think that's something we talk a lot about is it's kind of scary to make that move. And I think we all feel really good and excited about that now because we have so much sustainability in not only our programming, but also our funding in DC. And so now it's okay, this is the next big challenge. This is the new thing, but we're going to need a lot of support to make that happen. And so I when I hear why now, why not 3 years ago? And I think that's, a pretty honest answer as well, that, we have to be really secure in the fact that we're going to be able to raise that type of money. And I think we will. I think we have a lot. I mean, all of you are proving that we can, keep people engaged for a long time and be supporters.
Well, I know we've used our maybe more than our full hour. Oh, wait, we're right on time to say goodbye. I know people are in the middle of their workday right now. But just want to echo again, we really appreciate you all joining. We look forward to the day very soon to see many of you in person. We'll keep you posted. I hope people I'm trying this new thing of like sending emails to specific alumni, and I hope people got my like Philly alumni email I sent just like the hour before. But we'll be using our new comms channels to try to keep you all posted for like when we're in your city in person, and we can just get like a beer or a coffee and chat through some of the stuff we're up to. But until then, it's awesome to see people on Zoom. Anything else from the squad?
Thank you all for spending an hour with us.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, everybody.
In person.
See you.